Oh, welcome everyone to this week's Mastermind for the masses. We are having some technical challenges today, which is why we're all in such a good mood already. Lots of laughter and lots of fun. So that's what I've been up to this week is fighting through technical issues. No, big busy time at work this week, to be honest. Massive event. So really been focused on that. But it's been great, going great so far, and excited to just kind of see the rest of the week out. But what's going on with you guys other than watching me fiddle around with technology?
Yeah, I would just like to clarify for the audience. It wasn't we were having technical troubles. It was Josh was having technical troubles. Don't throw
Josh.
Shannon and I under the bus because you can't handle your tech.
Fair.
Oh, no, yeah. Outside of watching you struggle with that this week, I had my second hockey game. That went really well. We ended up winning. And then, yeah, just been still studying coding and everything like that. And that's kind of been my sort of main thing I've been working on, which has been really enjoyable. I actually found another really awesome resource on YouTube, Harvard's CS50 course. Is just like free, and they actually have a website where you can go to basically take the class for free. You don't like get any credits or anything like that, but you can take the class for free. It's college quality lecture. It's like the videos are great quality, audio is good, the what you're doing is good, the teacher is amazing. So yeah, it was just another great resource that I found, so I've been really enjoying that.
Very cool.
That's
What about
about
you,
it.
Shane?
No, there hasn't been too much going on. I've been working on developing a new content strategy for the clothing brand, so I've been putting my head towards that for a while. I'm also speaking of coding, I'm jumping into another kind of React JavaScript course to try to get me a little bit more familiar with some app programming. So what I'd like to do is I use the platform Shopify. I want to start. I have a couple app ideas and a couple things that I've started. I'd like to get into an environment and test out. So that's other than that, it's been pretty normal.
Very
Very
cool.
cool. Well, sounds like we're all got a decent amount on our plates. So, one of the things I've been wanting to chat with you guys about for a little while, and I think it's going to be super valuable for the audience too, and all of our listeners, is really striking kind of that healthy balance between work and life and managing the priorities that seem to come at us, right? And what's kind of the strategy that we can put into place to really, I guess, really just ensure that we keep that healthy balance, right? I mean, especially in America, I feel like we have this do more, do more, do more, and it's almost a badge of honor to tell someone that I'm super busy, right? But that's not always, and probably more often than not, is not the healthiest approach to take. So I'm just curious, how you guys strike that balance. I mean, Colby, obviously sounds like you've kind of found some of it with hockey and what you're doing there, but you have any other tips and tricks for how you really ensure you keep that in check, and don't let one get out of the way of the other?
Yeah, I mean, this one's really tough for a variety of reasons, but I mean, I should preface this first by saying, iterating to the audience, I don't have kids, and that makes a massive difference in terms of how much time I have to do things. So I feel like it's not a one-to-one comparison, obviously. But at least for myself, I still think even people without kids run into this problem where they want to do way more things than they have time for. And I think that just increases as you get older, you have kids maybe, or even if you don't have kids, like there's just more and more things in life that you'd like to do. But obviously, you still have work and you still have other social obligations maybe that you've already met or made and stuff like that. Um, and I think at the end of the day, for me, it's always come down to, I guess you could call it like sacrifice or just sort of cutting things or like chopping things off. Because like for me, I've recognized that I don't like to do a million different like things and like go 1 feet deep. Like I want to jump into two or three things and go down all the way into like the bottom of the abyss, so to speak, right? Like I have a lot of enjoyment that comes from like getting into all the details of a particular thing. And because I don't really like enjoy the surface level stuff as much, right? So knowing that about myself, it's painful, but I recognize always that like, there's just no way I'm doing this, right? Like between these things right now, it's just not happening, right? And it stinks because like you'll sit there, you'll talk to a friend, they're like, yeah, I'd really love to do this thing. Like, I'm like, yeah, that sounds super fun. And they're like trying to invite you along, but it's like, you have to make a sacrifice, right? Like you're just deluding yourself if you think you like have all this extra time that you don't have, right? Like you have to be very honest with yourself about what you can realistically get done. And I think that's really what people struggle with, is just not really reflecting on how much time in a day there is and how much time they actually have. And they may not also accurately represent how much time each of the tasks that they want to do takes. And therefore they overload their schedule and then have too much on their plate. Whereas I feel like you should plan for less. And then if you have time, you can do the extra things that like you want to do.
Man, that is such a strong point, because I think I have a tendency to do exactly what you're talking about. I underestimate how long something's going to take, and so I plan for 100% sometimes, right? And so I wind up being diluted, just like you said. Kind of, I know we've referenced The Office before, but it kind of got me thinking of Parks and Rec. So if you haven't seen Parks and Recreation, and you do like The Office, definitely worth watching. But there's a character on there, Ron Swanson, and one of the things he says is, he learned when he was like 11 that you shouldn't half-ass two things, instead whole-ass one thing, right? And I think that kind of encapsulates what you were just talking about, Colby, is really focusing on, um, what's the most important, right? When you're looking at your priority, and I think under planning is a super valuable tool, because if you do plan to 100% capacity, you're not planning for the unknown. And everyone that's lived more than 30 seconds on this planet has embraced unknown at some point, right? It's like one of the few things you can actually count on is the fact that something is going to pop up that you're not expecting. Yeah, Shan, what about you, man? I mean, obviously, you've got a lot on your plate that you're trying to balance too. When it comes to planning priorities and striking that work-life balance, like, I know you're a guy that likes to get a lot done, but do you plan to 100% capacity? Do you leave yourself buffer? Like, how do you approach that?
I operate like you guys already know. I'm not calendar oriented, so I don't operate like off of like a strict schedule, but I do shift priorities. I feel like extremely well, and a lot of people underestimate that. So right this week, I might, like I said, I'm developing a content strategy, so I'm more like oriented towards the business. But next week might be self care, right? So I'm able to pick up and shift a lot easier than I noticed in others. But with that being said, I also keep my prioritization buckets very broad, right? So everything like the gym, that wouldn't be bucketed into just exercising, and be bucketed into self-care for me, right? And now that I'm fully remote, that's one thing that's shifted since then. I've gained 2 more hours out of my day because I don't commute. So my self-care prioritization has bumped up, and I've spent more time, like instead of just going to the gym once a day, I now go to the gym and do either jiu-jitsu, or I go on a run later on in the day and go to the gym in the morning. So I kind of shift what's important to me based off of the schedule that's at hand. But at the same time, like that could completely change up by the next week. So I mean, there's always things that you got to keep disciplined on. We talked about that before. But to me, the importance for that is to try to keep things bucketed in a broad scope. So whenever you do, like, life handles you something. Colby mentioned not having kids earlier. I do have kids, but one of my kids gets sick, and I structure things in that like broader scope. It's easier for me to do a 180 turn and switch it up. So that's just like my strategy for prioritizing things.
Well, and you touched on something there, right? That your priorities kind of shift based on need. How do you determine what you want to focus on? You said one week might be the business, the next week's self-care. Like, how is that self-awareness and reflection? Is that like, do you have like
Yeah,
a cadence? How do you
it
deal with
takes
that?
it takes a little bit of minor responsibility in planning. I kind of figure that out before lunch, generally for the day. Like today my afternoon's pretty free, right? So I'm probably actually going to knock out some shopping that I've been meaning to do for a while, and at night I'm going to continue that content strategy, right? But today, if it was either Wednesday or Thursday, where my days are more filled up with my son's soccer practice, picking up from school, all that combined, normally my prioritization would completely switch up, right? So I think it takes a little bit of planning, whether that's like you said, kind of self-reflecting in the morning and thinking about, okay, like things are going to be hectic today. What can I not worry about? What can I like put towards the back burner and not stress about? Or it could be opposite, right? Like you could have a day off. It could be a holiday. It's like, okay, what can I knock out that I've been putting off? Or how can I shift my day to where like what's number one priority for me this week can be, you know, hyper focused on. So a lot of people procrastinate planning, or at least procrastinate prioritization. I think it causes it to like go in a domino effect, right? Like, oh, I didn't do anything today, so tomorrow hopefully it'll be better. It just cycles out of control.
Yeah. Well, and I want to do a real world example and pull back the curtain a little bit around this podcast, right? Because you guys definitely helped me be able to prioritize what I was trying to do with this as well. Because for me, priorities in my life are, I'm very faith driven. So for me, it's God, it's my wife, my kids, right? And this podcast, we were recording it at night. And that was, starting to kind of put a little bit of a stressor on that because I do have a lot of kids, and my wife would have to kind of take the burden, and we do this weekly, so it was starting to cause a little bit of a extra workload on her. And we had a conversation, and so I talked with you guys, and this is where I just have to give you guys tons of credit. You were willing to move this to kind of a lunch hour, right? So now we're actually able to record this during, otherwise I'd be sitting having just a quick meal and popping back in. But now we found a way to kind of fit this into life based on prioritization. And again, I give you guys tons of credit, because if it was just me doing the pod, that's an easy shift, right? But the collaboration and the people around you make that possible if you're willing to have that conversation. So, I just
Well,
wanted to pass.
I think that strategy I use actually fits to what I was saying, because you actually doubled down. Colby and I have both worked with Josh, for the audience that doesn't know that, and Josh never takes lunches. So like I remember when we had this discussion about switching to a lunch hour, it kind of enables Josh, because he's been thinking about it for a while, to my understanding, about like making sure he takes the time and has like a solid, even if it's a short lunch break, some kind of lunch break. So I mean, I think you kind of subliminally tackled that like prioritization of something you've been talking about for a while now, about actually taking lunch. Even though you're kind of doing a podcast episode, it's at least not it's at least shifted focus.
Well, breaks it up, right? So, and it allows me to accomplish the things that I've prioritized. And, again, though, I just think that the main thing that I'm just amazed by is the collaboration here. Just by asking the question, you guys were able to accommodate it, and collectively, we were able to figure it out. So,
Well, that's exactly the priority shift that went in my mind too, because now that we switched these to lunch, the thing that instantly popped in my head, and I feel like this is par for the course when you train yourself to make adjustments for like priority. But now, whereas we used to film in the afternoon, now I go to the gym a little bit earlier, and if I don't go to the gym a little bit earlier, it actually saves me time to either like go and spend an extra hour with my kids, or just go to out to dinner or something like that. Like that instantly jump through. I don't try to wait to like figure out what to do with that extra hour, and it relieves stress for me. Like it's a good stress relief. So like that was a good point, even bringing that up,
For sure.
it's just
yeah,
how it is.
and I think you guys are a lot like me, right? In the fact that we're not really the can we type of question askers, right? Like, can we do this? Can we figure it out? I think we're more of the how can we type of people, right? So we set a goal, and it's not really, is this goal accomplishable most of the time, because by the time we've set the goal, we've already done that pre-evaluation in our head. So
Yeah.
now it's, how can we do this, right? And we're more solution oriented, I think, which I also think helps keep that work-life balance, right? Because it allows you to really kind of figure out, okay, how do I make sure, and we talked about this with Chris on last week's podcast. If we have any listeners for the first time, you should check it out. Chris was talking about how he both his family and his working out were equally important, not equally, but both very important to him. And so when he started his family, he wanted to figure out a way to make that work. And rather than say, well, I just don't have time or I'm going to sacrifice this time, he actually just set up a home gym, right? And that allowed him to kind of do the same thing and reshift his approach, but still accomplish his goals. And I think that sometimes is really what prioritization requires, is a little bit of a reshifting of your approach, not necessarily your objectives. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Colby, would you, do you feel kind of the same way, or do you feel like sometimes you need to shift those objectives rather than your approach, or is it like a combination, probably of both?
I think it's a combination, but I definitely lean on the side of being more creative with how you move things around because I mean it's already kind of how I operate because essentially like what I was going to add into this is like to me it just helps to have like usually I like think of things in like three main things I'm focusing on, right? Because we all have habits that we just do like, you know, habitually you just don't even think about them, right? You don't have to put any effort into knowing they're going to happen, how to do them at all. Like they don't suck up any of your mental bandwidth. But especially I think when talking about priorities, a lot of the time it's because you're trying to fit something new in or a couple of new things in, or you're restructuring things and you're trying to figure out how to prioritize them in the right fashion because you don't really need to ever think about this unless something's changing, right? Otherwise, you're just going to do what you always do, and it's usually kind of automated to some extent. And so, usually, when things are changing in my life or I'm adding something new in, it's like usually I would say it's like 1 to 3 things. I think anything more is really troublesome to deal with. And to me, it always like helps to really understand the things that I'm adding in and to what level I want those things to be a part of my life now, right? So working out is a great example because it was one of those things where it's like you said, Josh, how can I fit this in? It's not will I fit this in, it's how, right? So it's a very like important, very urgent thing that I want to make sure I get done. So right, it's a very high priority, you could say. And so then it just comes down to how do I creatively problem solve my life schedule with insertion of X amount of time in X space doing these things. And like right now, so for me, it's working out, it's studying coding and learning that skill, and hockey, because those are like 3 new things in my life outside of my sort of like general go to work, travel home, grocery shop, laundry, all the sort of like weekly things that you would do. And for me, just like Shan said, you can really shift when you're doing things at what time when it's more fluid like that. And I really like that because if I start to feel like I'm just missing the objective by pushing things around, because if I need to do things at a set time every single day, all the time, it's pretty demoralizing for me personally. I feel like I'm failing rather than feeling proud of creatively like trying to find a solution to do the things I want to get done and still achieve the same objective at the end of the day. So I just really enjoy that method of approaching it. But I do think there are times, to your point, Josh, where you do have to be like, no, I have to keep doing this. Like this has got to go, right? Like I think sometimes you, depending on how important that thing is you're trying to add, you know, you need to make that judgment call of, well, is this staying or is this going, sort of thing.
Right. And I do think there's, sometimes you have to take a honest look at what time wasters you have, right? And I'm going to use my wife again because she's a great example. She gets up at 4:30 most days to go to the gym. I don't know how she has the willpower to do it. I like to think I have a lot of willpower and I'm incredibly stubborn and will do things, but man, every week, I'm just amazed that she gets up and does that. Um, but that also requires a little bit. Maybe we go to bed a little bit earlier, right? And we're asleep by 9:30, 10 o'clock. But really, if we weren't, we're probably just going to be sitting there watching TV, right? And so when you weigh out which one's going to give you more value, the health benefits from working out obviously outweigh even kind of the relaxation benefits that you can get from an extra hour of TV or whatever it might be, right? So I think it is identifying the, for lack of a better term, right, your ROI in your own life. What is the return that you're getting on the investment, and is that making your life better? or getting you closer to your desired results? Or is it something that's, again, we talked about this before, is it neutral or is it distracting? And if it's if it's moving you forward, I think you do want to figure out how do you fit this in without getting rid of it, right? And then if you decide
Yep.
that it's not really moving you forward, maybe that's when you start to just shift some of those priorities. Um, or it's not the right season, to Shan's point earlier, right? His kind of shifts depending on the needs of the moment. Um, and that can be true too. You know, I started writing my second book probably, I don't know, 8 years ago, and I'm just now getting to the point where I'm about ready to release it because things came up, things happened, and I had to put some things to the side and reprioritize for a period at a time. But that doesn't mean I can't come back to it either. Sometimes just pressing that pause button is enough to help balance that work life
Yep.
situation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one
and I
thing.
think you're bringing up a good point too. Like you need some sort of north star or goal or output in mind to make any of these decisions. Without that sort of thing, you have nothing to guide or inform why you're making choices around what you should prioritize. And so I think like that's definitely like the base step is you have to figure out what you want and what that a vision for your future would look like in order to like have any sense of what to do. You're saying, Sham?
No, actually, you got jump right to the point. Honestly, one of the earliest coaching sessions Josh and I have had together, and that's like one priority, and I fit that in self care too, just for like a further perspective, right? Like if I do coaching, therapy, whatever, like I'll trade out a day. I go to the gym for that. I'm not saying that you should do that for everyone or it works for everyone, but it helps for me to relieve stress to know that if I bucket them together, like um, I'm not procrastinating because I'm just reshifting my focus. But I was getting to the point that you were making. When we had one of those early coaching sessions, I was facing that confusion on not knowing what to prioritize. I had a sense of discipline, and I knew, like, based off of the goals you were just talking about, Colby, I had a list of things, but I didn't know how to operate a day-to-day basis and know which one's the most important to work on and which one's the least. Because in reality, in my mind, like it shifts all over the place, right? One day I'll be
Yep.
excited about starting a new business. The next day I'll be excited about learning a new coding language, or getting familiar with my photography or something like that. So one thing Josh and I did together is we created this tree map of all of my, like right off the top of my head, the number one priorities in my life. And we developed it in a way that it can be dynamic and shift. So basically, instead of tackling it from like a planned perspective, you're tackling it from a free time perspective. Because let's be honest, like even our really overachievers and busy people, there's always some sense of free time in the week, to where you're kind of just saying, what do I do? And you're winging it. And some people can wing it really well because they have that sense of discipline, but some people like myself can't. So I'll bring out that chart and I'll look at it and try to see what I can fit in that makes the most sense for the day, or something that can keep my goal alignment in place. So I constantly use that chart, and I hadn't had to update it in like 6 months now, Josh. Like we were able to develop it so well to where again like my priorities are broad, so if it's not going to list out like content development. It's going to list out like business practice or like business goals or something like that. So I can kind of subliminally make the shift myself and meet that criteria, and it really does help a lot with stress. So I recommend like anyone who's trying to kind of operate their day to day, not knowing what they want to do, but knowing that they want to do a lot. Sit down and try to develop some kind of like tree map for you to go off of. Because in reality, you can try to plan out your day, but that just becomes another thing to add to your priority list. Organization and planning. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Shannon, I mean, I think since we love analogies on this, right, what we did was kind of help create like a GPS with all of the different alternate routes. You're still headed to the same destination, but which route makes the most sense today, right? Because sometimes the fastest route differs, and the route you want to take based on what you're trying to accomplish, right? And that's
yeah,
essentially the tool that we provided. And if anyone is interested in learning more about coaching or any of that stuff, you can always drop a comment down below, or check out drjoshnelson.com. Just want to make sure you guys realize we're here for you in multiple ways through this podcast or through anything you might be looking for. But
to tackle your analogy farther, Josh, too, I mean, you could have 3 destinations in
yeah,
one round.
very, very true.
Right? One trip. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It was interesting that you brought that
it's
up,
a
though,
great
Shan, because there was something I did, I think it was back in college. It's like a self-authoring program where essentially you you basically detailed out all of your past stuff. So it was like a therapy session with yourself, like just you and yourself, and like these sort of prompts. And originally, like you do like past authoring, where basically you try to remember anything that like caused you, like that sticks out in your brain, like it's painful, exciting, or whatever, and you kind of would like just sort of like mentally throw up on the page or whatever of all those sorts of experiences. And that was super helpful, obviously, but I think it led in really well to the part where you're doing like a authoring your future. And it's like basically saying, what do you want your relationships with your peers to look like now, a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What do you want like your future to look like, in that same interval? And it kind of did that for a bunch of different things. And for me, what was super helpful about it is it forces you to obviously reflect a bunch on your life and what you want your future to look like. And what's great too is it forces you to look how everything connects, right? Because you can't say, I want to be, a number one, like I want to be on the number one of the top song list in 2 years, and then say I would like a really healthy relationship with all my friends and family, and have it be perfect, right? Like those two things do not like align with one another, because they require the first one requires you to make an absurd amount of sacrifice and grind for an absurd amount of time every single day to get to that level where you can produce that, right? And I think that's something that just not many people do with their, at any point in their life, is really sit down and take the time to see holistically what they would like to accomplish, and if any of those things are very contradictory to one another. Because like that's, to me, is like the worst feeling in your life, when you have these things that you want to do, and like some of them are just completely like taking you in polar opposite directions, and so you never feel like you make any progress in any of the fields that you want to like succeed in, right? And again, it just boils down to sacrifice. You have to choose. Like if you see a conflict, you have to be like, man, is this really that important to me? Like which one of these would I want to give up? Because I have to give up, I have to sacrifice at least a little bit of one. Maybe you don't say like, I'm not going to like not talk to my friends and family, but maybe you have to realize, yeah, my social relationships won't be insane if I want to progress my career to this like insane level in this short amount of time, right? So I just found it super helpful and very analogous to what you said you were doing with Josh a little bit in terms of providing that map.
Yeah, it's a common theme of this podcast too, like goal setting, right? Like we talk about that in almost every episode, and it's worthwhile to even mention it, because it's important and it kind of drives every one of our topics. So I think that is extremely important. And although it sounds like a repeating record at this point, but it really is important. And like Colby said, just like kind of figuring out kind of how they intertwine with each other and how they relate is important as well, because it could be tough to prioritize your day when you really don't have any set goals or set objectives that are lasting for more than a month at a time. So
yeah, you're just wandering around at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I fear for people who operate that way too, because it is scary.
Well, I think that's why it's important when you're prioritizing to think short-term goals, right? But really start looking at those long-term goals. And I know we've talked about this a couple times in that book, Living Forward, with the eulogy and all of that. If you're headed for a particular place, then how do you break it apart? I think Colby, it was you last time, talked about eating an elephant a bite at a time, right? And that's essentially what we're talking about when you look at prioritizing, goal setting, and even life planning, right? You're saying, okay, if I'm here now and I want to be there, how do I get there, right? And breaking it down into small steps makes it seem a lot more accomplishable than looking at the entire elephant, right? If you're like, okay, well, I just need to do this one bite, right, and you can focus on that. it allows you to really make that progress and not get hung up on the overwhelming arch. I mean, if you look at anyone's life from where they start to where they end, I mean, that's a massive amount of things, right? It's a massive amount of choices, it's a massive amount of sacrifices, tons of prioritization. No matter what it is, that's a huge endeavor. So when you start to think about how do I have those types of lives, I think it is just taking one step at a time. There's a little bit of luck involved probably along the way, but that's my favorite definition of luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? Because one of the things I love to tell my kids is everyone that's ever done anything, right? Pick anyone in history that has been noteworthy. They all started the same as every one of us, right? You were born, and you might have had a leg up here or there, but everybody kind of starts out as that baby, and your life choices are a culmination. They accumulate, and you wind up on this amazing journey that is massive, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. So, and that's why I think it's so important to establish that early on. What is most important to you? What are you willing to, like Colby, to your analogy a second ago, right? You could become super famous in 2 years, become one of the best podcasts people ever, right? Or social media influencer, or whatever you want to do, any force element, right? But you might have to make sacrifices you're not okay with. Um, and that's where going back to what we did with this podcast, shifting it to lunch, right? I'm not okay with, continually adding additional workload onto my wife for really at this point, it's probably more of a passion project, right? I mean, our podcast audience is growing and, we are having some success with this, but, at the end of the day, like this isn't any of our day jobs, right? It's something we're passionate about, we enjoy doing, and we're happy to help everyone with this. But when it comes down to priority shifting, I've got to put my family first on what I'm trying to do. So
Sure. And I think like just to touch on like another point, it's already kind of been highlighted a little bit, but and you can't have a million different like priority number ones, right? Like there can only be one number one priority, right? And like you can sort of break it up into groups, but like I can't imagine you can have more than two or three like of that like of equal level like highest priority things. It just doesn't work like that. You have to. I think it's just kind of naive to think that you can have more because there's just not enough time in the day to make everyone and everything the same priority level, right? And it's so you have to make decisions. Like it's just that's inevitable, and I think that's the hardest thing to come to terms with is just the fact that you may have a lot of different interests, a lot of different desires, things you want to accomplish, but you have to select a couple. And I know, like for me, that was really hard at first, just because I didn't really feel like I even really know what I wanted in life, so it's kind of hard to choose when you're at that level. But I think even at the polar opposite end, when there's too many choices, I think Shane even brought this up at one point. It's hard to really like just make a choice. And I think the thing that helped me a lot was too is just realizing that if you don't make a choice around what you're going to make your priorities, life will do it for you. Like just happenstance and fate or whatever you want to call it is going to make those choices for you, and you may not be super happy with what it chooses. So like to me, I think like that's at least what motivates me, I guess, to commit is just knowing that like it's going to happen regardless of whether or not I choose.
yeah. Well, you guys have heard me say that a bunch of times when it comes to even work, right? Never leave a bad situation. There's a temptation when you're in a challenging work environment or you're not completely happy that you're going to leave. I don't think you should ever leave a role because it sucks. I think you should go somewhere, right? Make an intentional choice of why. Because the worst you could do is leave a crappy situation for possibly even a worse situation, right? You have to really make a conscious choice. And Colby, I'm going to use you as an example again, right? Like you made the choice, I want to live in South Carolina. That's where I'm
Yep.
going. And so you made the choice to go there. You figured out the rest, but you said, this is where I want my life to be. This is where I'm going. It wasn't that you left a bad situation necessarily. It just wasn't exactly where you wanted to be. So you took the initiative and you're making life what you want life to be, which I think is just super admirable and really awesome that you had the courage to do it. One, but then you recognized that it was a priority for you and then took action on it, which is just super cool.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely been very fun and very been one of the more rewarding times I would say in my life, because I think obviously I moved out of Florida originally too at one point to move up to Philly for a job promotion for my first job out of school, and that didn't work out well. That was a nightmare, and I learned a lot about that and used a lot of what I learned to help make this past transition a lot better. And there was obviously a lot of worries about making the same mistakes. But yeah, it's been super fulfilling so far.
Yeah. No, I know Shan doing a very similar thing with, like he said, that placemat of his to really ensure that he stays on track with that. And it's not a one size fits all for everyone, but that has been an incredibly valuable tool for him. And I use something very similar myself. It just allows make sure that I keep my focus over time, because that's the other thing, right? As you add more things in, like we talked about, and you start to get a little more on your plate. Like Colby wants some kids start popping into your life there. Things like that. You're gonna have to start figuring out how it all fits in, and it can pose a significant challenge, and you just have to say, okay, well, what is it that I am willing to go without, at least for a time period, and what am I not? I've told this to you guys. I don't think I've shared it with our podcast listeners, but once upon a time, I actually thought about becoming an actor, and I went to a few auditions and did some things. Almost went out to LA actually to do a couple of things, but ultimately it boiled down to it just wasn't going to fit in with what I was doing with my family at the time. Two very young kids, and I was going to go venture out with no real sense of income, and it was just not a wise decision based on my priorities. And similar, and I'm just going to throw this out there too. I once applied to be an astronaut, right? And I had an opportunity to apply a second time because I didn't get in the first time. And I know it sounds silly, but I was like, oh man, I filled it all out. I was ready to hit apply again. And then, again, timing with my family, it just would not have been, I couldn't take 6 months to go to Mars or something was like the actual application I was doing. Right. And so I know these are like really out there scenarios, but it's real life. It's things that I looked at and thought about doing, and then I made choices based on the priorities in my life on what to do. So
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't think I could ever picture myself filling out an application to become an astronaut. That's wild.
I'm sure I have no shot whatsoever, but to quote Mr. Wayne Gretzky and also Michael Scott, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? Um,
No,
so you hear people say shoot your shot, and that's what I was doing. I figured, hey, worst they can do is say no, and that's true of life too. Worst that people can do is really say no, and if you don't
no.
try, you're guaranteed to have no success with that. So
Yeah, he was competing with the
Sure.
monkeys that they send into space.
yeah, the monkeys had a better resume than I do. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I did keep my rejection letter though, so
Yeah. Hey,
Nice.
hey, just yeah, that honestly is something that I would find neat, right? Like a rejection letter is something crazy like that. I wouldn't even be upset about it. Just the fact that
yeah.
I even applied.
Well, I like to think 50 years from now, or when I'm probably gone and my kids are digging through the house to clean up stuff, they're gonna be like, "What is this?"
They're gonna be like, "Mom, you gave Dad way too much freedom."
Right? Strike up a fun conversation there. So. But I digress. My main point there was just ensuring that you set the priorities are really key, and then you'll always be satisfied with the decisions that come from it, right? Um, because there's inevitably going to be a trade off where you want to do things, and you can't always do both those things, like you were talking about earlier,
Right.
Colby. You gotta pick. And
Yeah.
if you pick the one that's your priority, you're always going to be okay with it. Even though you might have wanted to do that thing, you're always going to be okay with where you end up, because the most important is met.
True.
So guys, I think it's about that time. Shan, you got any final thoughts around prioritization and how you really keep that balance in life and work?
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate my point. Like your ability to shift focus and kind of tackle it from both ends is really important, right? Like you can plan your day out with what's important to you and what you want to prioritize getting done, or you can try to operate with discipline the best you can until you have free time, right? And then that placemat diagram we talked about, it's important, right? Like you can look at something and kind of have some kind of self guidance or planning. That's predetermined for you to be able to tell, okay, like these are all my options. What do I want to prioritize for short term? What do I want to like focus on this week, this day, this month, so on and so forth. I think it's so important to be able to shift because a lot of advice out there is find what you love and double down on it. That is important, but not everyone has a one directional passion. There's many of us like I feel like myself that like to dabble into a lot of different avenues, and that kind of advice and practice just doesn't work for me. So I'm able to shift my priorities and shift my focus at least on a weekly basis. I think it's important if you're going to do that to try to take the time to plan it out or write down what your goals, objectives, or even just your number one priority, or not your number one priorities, but your top 10 priorities are.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Colby, what are you thinking, sir?
I think for me, I would just suggest for people that are struggling to figure out what to prioritize, to Shan's point, like they're kind of all over the place. It's okay to just pick some stuff that sounds a little bit interesting, a little bit fun. You're not sure if that's what you really, really want to commit to, but just pick it anyways, start doing it. And then if you find out that you don't want to do it anymore, that's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I think people think a lot of times when they create schedules, they create goals, they create this like list of priorities that they feel like it's immutable, it can never change. Yeah, like sometimes, like Shan's point, you can create something that lasts 6 months and it's great and things are going great. But sometimes it takes some iteration and you need to like change some stuff, and that's perfectly fine. You didn't fail at doing the thing. You're not lost. You're just figuring stuff out, and you will figure it out over multiple iterations, and that's completely fine.
Yeah, and reiterate on Colby's point too, just to put it in perspective, like on my placemat, one of my priority boxes are self-care. We talked about that. So that doesn't mean that, I need to focus on the gym. It actually goes directly to your point where maybe I don't know what I want to do. So I throw CrossFit in there, right? Like that's how I'm able to shift. So I can try out CrossFit for like 2 weeks, and it doesn't feel like something that I'm adding to the list, but for me, it feels like something I'm shifting in the list. And now I'm able to go do that, find out if I like it. Probably won't, because I know I don't. I probably know I won't like CrossFit, but I want to try it. And then, move forward, right? Like make the shifts, go back to the gym just on a daily basis, or go back to jiu-jitsu and find out what I really am passionate about. So I think that is extremely important too, right? Like where you mentioned, just tackle it.
Yeah, you've already made the space and you just kind of move things into that space. So you don't have to really readjust your life to meet your priorities. You just can kind of shift up what's satisfying those priorities. And I'm interested to hear about your CrossFit journey because I actually think that you might be someone that likes CrossFit. I've done it a couple times, and I think it might be something you fall into, to be honest. But I'm
I think
curious
I
to
like a lot of things surrounding CrossFit, but I don't like the sense of it just being like a broad athletic skill, which is why I like jujitsu so much. Like it's I'm able to really measure out in a very specific way, like my progress. Whereas CrossFit, you just become in incredible shape, which is great. But now, what do I do with that incredible shape? Like where can I compete? Where can I test it to the limit? And I know there is a lot of like CrossFit competitions and stuff. It's just I don't know. We'll see.
I tell you what, we're gonna have an all-star hockey player here. We're gonna have a CrossFit guru. I mean, if you aren't excited about this podcast now, you should be because things are just gonna get better and better. But I think for me, final thoughts to wrap things up. I love movies. I'm a big movie guy. And have you guys seen City Slickers, the original one? Colby's probably too young. Yeah, I knew you'd say no. Shan too. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, um, so City Slickers, Billy Crystal, great movie. But the reason it applies here is there's an old cowboy in the movie. His name is Curly, and he's riding along with Billy Crystal, and Billy Crystal and him are talking about different things, and Curly mentions, "Yeah, I know the secret to life." And Billy Crystal's like, "Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Can you share it with me?" And Curly holds up his finger, right? And Billy's like, "What, your finger?" And Curly's like, "No, it's one thing." And Billy goes, "Oh, well, what's the one thing?" And Curly looks at it and he says, "That's what you've got to figure out." So the secret to life is probably that one thing, but what is that one thing for you, right? What is your purpose? What is that priority for you? What is going to fulfill you? And it's going to be different for everyone. And I just love that scene, and I probably didn't do it justice. So I'm sure if you don't have time to watch the whole movie, quick YouTube clip, Secret of Life, City Slicker, it'll come right up. Take about a minute of your time, but it's totally worth it in my opinion. I think it's great advice, and I love it. But I encourage you, think about what it is. What's that one thing for you? And if you're courageous enough, we'd love to see it in the comments and have a chat with you. And kind of might give us some ideas to talk about on future podcasts as well. So I want to thank everyone for being here today and talking and sharing time with us to talk through prioritization and how to keep that balance in life. And hopefully, you will gain a lot of benefit from this and share it with your friends. Whether that's through posting online, sending something to a group chat. Everyone loves those. Whatever works for you. But like, share, and we will see you next time on Mastermind for the Masses. Thanks, everyone.